I'm Mark Moore from Free Thinking Therapies. I'm a hypnotherapist based in Leicestershire. I also use a lot of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, in my work. I do some counselling. I teach and practice mindfulness meditation. And I also give talks to groups, businesses, charities, organisations that are designed to provoke thought and conversation about our mental health and well-being. There's a lot of talk over on social media at the moment regarding stress, anxiety, and a lot of people are talking about particularly just feeling anxious. It's a word that's cropping up more and more. So I want to spend a few minutes today just talking about anxiety, why we have it, how to recognise it, and maybe just a few strategies to help cope better and hopefully become more resilient through this process and beyond. So as previously spoken about on social media, stress and anxiety are perfectly natural. They are a normal response to situations in life. And these responses are built in since the dawn of time. Man has had to respond to evolving threats, evolving sort of changes to our environment and society as a whole. And probably back in sort of prehistoric times, life was much simpler. Threats were down to probably dinosaurs, the next local tribe, etc. Whereas now our threats are perceived to be far greater and far more difficult, far more complex. Back then, all we needed was food and shelter. Now we tend to feel we're threatened if we lose internet access or our mobile data goes down, etc. But the millions of years that have passed have just allowed the human body and the human mind to evolve to help prepare us for our basic response. And when we're stressed and anxious, our basic response is fight or flight. And that's been there, as I say, since the dawn of time, if you like. But we often think that that is the only response we have. But as I say, our responses have changed and developed over time as the threats have become more evolved. So there's no longer sort of, we class as fight or flight. There's also fight, flight, or the freeze response. And some of you may have witnessed this. It's that moment of our mind just trying to process what's happening. And at that point, we just physically can't move. We freeze, if you like. And that's particularly if those instincts sort of cut in when our survival is threatened and our life feels threatened. But there's also something called a challenge response. And this gives us a more focused, not a fearful state. And this causes us to produce high levels of neurosteroid, DHEA, and that actually motivates us into action. It increases our confidence, if you like. And at a very simple example, it's that awful moment at work where suddenly you realise you're about to miss a deadline, that stomach does that somersault, you feel sick and anxious, but suddenly you think, no, hang on, I can do this. You don't fight it, you don't run away. Actually, it's a challenge response. You rise to that challenge. There's also something called a tend and befriend response. And this is where high levels of oxytocin are produced. This increases our courage, strengthens what they call pro-social behaviour. And probably the classic example for this is with the emergency services. These are the people that ring towards the danger that the rest of us tend to run away from. But doctors, nurses, firemen, soldiers, they don't get selected for their job because they can demonstrate that they've got some sort of evolved response to the threat. They grew up like you and I. They're conditioned and they're told what is dangerous, what's not safe, what to avoid. And as children, we see adult responses to danger. We hear our parents tell us, don't go near something, it's hot. We see our mother jump on the chair when there's a spider or mouse in the room, and we learn from them what is dangerous, what isn't. And the normal physical responses that we have are still there in those people as well. But what it means is that those people that are trained, doctors, nurses, firemen, etc., basically are taught to deal with whatever threat they're dealing with. So if we look at something like the fire brigade again, they're trained, they know what to do, how to keep safe. So using that knowledge, they can go in, follow their rules, and they're able to go into blazing buildings and deal with the threat that it represents. So this really suggests that we can change the way we perceive threat. So they say firemen are taught to deal with it, they can cope with it. They still experience the same physical responses. The heart rate increases, their senses will sharpen, they may feel nauseous and shaky. And it's all perfectly normal response to stress and anxiety. I think recognising those signs is key to realising that we're suffering from anxiety. We may not immediately know what causes us to feel that way, but at least we can acknowledge that something is happening to us. So what might be the signs? Well, I've mentioned a couple already, that rapid heartbeat, increased breathing, but something like insomnia, just the ability to get a full, restful night's sleep. We may have some memory issues, just struggle to recall certain events and just struggle to keep focused. We may overthink certain things, just ruminating on certain problems. Sweating, headaches, just a constant worrying, lack of patience. Stomach issues is a common symptom. Avoidance, avoiding people, avoiding situations that we might be worried about, or we may find ourselves constantly seeking reassurance. At the end of the scale, we may just be procrastinating, avoiding things, or may even start to feel that we're suffering panic attacks. And remember, while stress is about immediate threats, going into a situation and you're aware that it's going to be unpleasant, anxiety is that thought of what might be. It's that worry about what could happen and what we think will happen. I think when we feel anxious, one of the first things to do, and I know it sounds old advice, sort of thing that your parents would say, but just stop. Take a deep breath or two and just pause. And there's a few things we need to ask ourselves at that point. I think firstly is, what am I reacting to? What's making me feel the way I feel? And then ask yourself, what do I think is actually going to happen here and now? And then ask, what is the worst? What's the best thing that could happen in this situation? And also on top of that, what's most likely going to happen now? Ask yourself, am I getting things out of proportion? Ask, how important is this really? How important will it be in 6 months' time? Are you overestimating the threat or the danger or the possible outcome? And are you then, therefore, underestimating your own ability to cope? Think of similar situations you've been in that you've coped with. Ask yourself, are you mind reading what you think others might be thinking? Very often I've talked to clients, they say, I know what someone thinks. I know what they're thinking about me. We don't. Absolutely cannot mind read. Ask yourself, do you believe you can predict the future? Because again, another regular response I get is, I know what's going to happen. We don't. We have several scenarios we can think about, but we don't actually know. Ask yourself, is there another way of looking at this? Is this a fact I'm thinking about, or is it just an opinion? Is it my thoughts, my opinions, my emotions? Ask yourself, what advice would I give somebody else in this situation, be it a friend, family member? And ask, am I just putting pressure on myself? I think a very good question also is, what would be the consequences of responding in the way that I usually do? Particularly if you think that sometimes the outcome's not always ideal. And is there another way of dealing with it? What's the most helpful and most effective response to take for yourself, for the situation, and maybe for other people there? I think finally on this is just sometimes just visualize yourself coping with the situation that you feel anxious about. Imagine the outcome. Remember, anxiety is about the thinking of what could be. And we always tend to think the negative. So ask yourself, what if this wasn't bad? What if the possible outcomes, the positive outcomes, what might they be? So remember, the physical sensations that we feel when we're anxious, the sweating, the nausea, are real. But remember, these are triggered by our mind's interpretation of events. And these events have not yet happened. They are simply the story that we create in our mind and that we're telling ourselves, often repeatedly, often changing the story each time with possible outcomes. But it's worth remembering that at the moment, the threat is in your mind. So it's vital that we recognise this and also consider how you perceive stress. So do you see stress as wholly negative. If any of you are involved in competitive sports or games, ask yourself how you feel before a big game or competition. What you're actually probably feeling is a degree of your stress response. It's preparing you for what you're about to do. Your heart rate increases, your breathing, you feel more alert, you feel tensed, feel wide, as you're saying, in the zone. And that is a stress response. You're anxious, you're worrying about something, you want to do well, and that's how you feel. So there is an upside to stress. So having to adapt and change can cause stress and anxiety. And bear in mind, we're always having to adapt and change. So being aware of what is happening to you, and how you might be responding to that is vital. Remember, some things we can't change, some things we can adapt to. But think about what you're doing, why, and think about the transition from one phase of life or from one activity to another, and what might be making you anxious. But it is about recognising and accepting what we're feeling. So always ask yourself, what is the fear? And, I think a wonderful exercise is just to try and bring that into your consciousness. Just actually really stop and ask yourself, what is it I'm worried about? What is it that's scaring me? And people often don't like to use the word fear, but a lot of anxiety is around fear of something. So just give it a name. What are the physical sensations are you feeling in your body as a result of that fear, as a result of that feeling? So just notice what is happening. And again, just breathe. Just give yourself permission to feel whatever it is you're feeling. Be you old, young, male, female, it doesn't matter what. The rules are you need to accept it, understand it, and work through it carefully and gently. So just try and go and understand the feelings that you have, and just often the initial feeling turns into something else. So fear can turn into grief or anger, for example. As I said just a moment ago, it's about being gentle, being kind with yourself. So offer yourself some support, and whatever you need right now. Remember, it's okay to feel whatever you feel. And as you go through that process of thinking, then just ground yourself, just bring yourself back into the room, just try and focus on an object or a sound, and just take a few moments. Because worrying about what we worry about won't help. It's about working through it and being gentle with yourself, as I say. We all worry. Professionals worry, amateurs worry, everybody worries. It's perfectly normal. So I hope you found this simple intervention useful. Hopefully it's just given you some thought and maybe just spark some conversation in your work or your household about how you deal with it. As always, talking about it is such a huge help. So make sure you keep talking to each other. Listen out for people who you think might need some help. So there's lots of available sort of help online through therapies, through hypnotherapy, counselling, etc. So please, if you're really struggling, you need professional help, do look for it and reach out. It's all about just trying to make your tomorrow a little bit better than your yesterday. So I'll keep posting these videos on YouTube and just talking about some of the issues that are trending on social media. You can pop over to my website. If you're an individual, if you're a business looking for employee assistance programs, etc., hopefully there's something there for everybody. So until next week, please take care, keep safe. Thank you.